Hello, Meoni here, and welcome back to another discussion video for Final Fantasy XIV. I woke up this morning with the idea to do this one. A few people have been talking about this of late, both in official publications and well-known review sites, which we won't mention or quote today, but simple Google searches will give you the same results I used for this video. Basically, this discussion is that Final Fantasy XIV is simply not flashy enough, that its flashy sequences are not up to standard, set pieces are not as colorful as perhaps in other games, and that the game essentially is looking a little bit dated. Now, whilst that might be true to some extent, I can't agree with the point that the game isn't flashy enough. Personally, from a raiding perspective, which is how I approached this immediately in my mind, we actually turned down a lot of the spell effects in my own group so that we can see more of the mechanics freely. The mechanics in this game are far behind anything else I've played at high-end content and are way more enjoyable because of the fact I've played a lot of MMORPGs that simply don't have as many advanced mechanics in the boss fights as we have in 14, so it makes sense that I would like to actually see them, and I do find myself using a macro to actually turn off the majority of other player spell effects so I can actually do the callouts for my raid group when it's raid night. So I can't really agree personally with the idea that the game isn't flashy enough in terms of spell effects, at least, but when I actually turn them off basically for our raid nights. And a lot of people are like me as well and lower those effects so they can see what they're doing, and it results in better progression overall, actually seeing what you're doing. Everything else, I have that fully turned on to Ultra and all the spell effects up, which I have to say in stuff like Alliance raids is very overwhelming and looks absolutely beautiful, but the mechanics for those fights are, much lower in challenge than that of a Savage piece of content, and therefore it doesn't matter so much, or at least in my opinion. But to say that the game isn't flashy in terms of its spell effects and job abilities and stuff like that, it makes me wonder if many of these publications and online review outlets have actually played the same game as me. Have they played the same parts of the game? So a lot of the time, a lot of these review places will get a review copy to look through the game, and specifically they're talking about Shadowbringers. So it remains to be seen how much of the game these people have played. But even in the earlier parts of Shadowbringers, a lot of the newer job abilities that you are given are incredibly flashy in comparison to a lot of games I've played. Dragoon in particular got quite a lot of buffs in terms of its visual fidelity. It certainly looks quite impressive now in comparison to how it did in Stormblood. So I certainly think that there is a development curve towards making things look really, really awesome in comparison to previous expansions. Now, when all of these things are together in something like an Alliance raid, the cacophony of spell effects can be truly overwhelming, and it really is super flashy. So I'm trying to see what they're actually comparing it to on the current MMORPG market. The most recent example I think people are talking about is a game called Blue Protocol, a game which myself I'm moderately interested in checking it out. It's another MMO from the East and has incredibly flashy sequences, spell effects that literally erupt in front of your eyes. In many ways it looks quite overwhelmed, but all of the content I've seen so far demonstrates very simple mechanics, okay? So a lot of that stuff is oversaturated in spell effects, but ultimately the fights that they've shown in the demo footage that I've seen does seem to be revolving around the idea of simple cone mechanics and cleaves in front of bosses and stand behind the dragon's head if you want to live and stuff like that. Simple, traditional RPG avoidance stuff, that sort of mechanics. Don't stand in the fire, stuff like that. But at the same time, they're overwhelming the screen with flashy effects, which in many ways I believe is a way of trying to sell the game. Oh look, this person can do this massive eruption of time and space and destroy half the screen. Yes, that looks incredible, but when you have that happening every 5 seconds and you're trying to do a fight, that might become a little bit alarming. To actually put a downer on Final Fantasy XIV because of a lack of flashiness, apart from that being predominantly, I believe, quite, simply put, a lie, it is very flashy, is a very interesting thing indeed. It seems like they're pulling at, teeth to try and find something to dislike about the game. And Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of stuff to talk about. The graphical fidelity is locked behind the technical limitations of a game, right? You're never going to have something photorealistic. But if you were to try and, compare that to a newer game, you have to remember that the game was developed on a different engine, 9 times out of 10. The development tools that are available now aren't available back then. These games have lasted the test of time, and there's a reason for it. Final Fantasy XI looks the way it does because it was built on a certain engine, and to actually re-release Final Fantasy XI would be the only way of doing that, which there's current rumors of a mobile port and basically a remake of that game, which, if is true, will be fantastic. But at the same time, the original game has that certain charm. It was developed in a certain manner, and they kept that all the way through development because they wanted that particular aesthetic. When it comes to World of Warcraft, for example, a lot of people criticize that game for looking overly cartoony, but that's the way it was developed, and that's the aesthetic they went with. Now, they did do some graphical overhauls in terms of character models and texture changes, but for the most part, they kept the same aesthetic because that's the one they wanted to. They could have spent many hundreds of millions of dollars to rework the graphic engine and make it super realistic, but that's not really something they wanted to do, not because of money limitations or anything like that, but simply because they wanted to keep the game looking pretty much the same as it always has, within reason, with just some sprucing up. And maybe that's what Final Fantasy XIV needs, but for the most part, I think they've got away with that. A lot of the newer models in the game are a far cry, different from some of the older stuff in A Realm Reborn, but at the same time, their aesthetics have kept the same. They're trying to aim it towards one direction, and I think that personally does quite a lot of justice. I actually really dislike games where they have something that looks like a potato at the start, but then changes halfway through. It's like playing Evoland, unironically, I love Evoland because that demonstrates the idea that you have a storyline set across many different eras of technology. If you've ever played that game, it's a fantastic little indie project that went pretty big. Nice little RPG as well. There's a couple games like that where they basically start out in sort of like an 8-bit sort of town with very little movement and 2D graphics, and then by the end of the game you're playing in a 3D universe. Is that what people want? Because personally, if a game did that and actually just kept changing its graphical style, that would be way more jarring to me than if they just kept it looking like a potato all the way through, just a pixelated potato at the start, keep it a pixelated potato at the end. So the idea that we're comparing different MMORPGs technologically doesn't seem like a fair assumption to me. Things like Blue Protocol have their own particular draws, but that's based on their engine and their development at the time that they're creating it, based on whenever they got access to that technology. It's not like Final Fantasy XIV isn't still pushing the boundaries, but the majority of the focus in 14 that a lot of other games don't have is their focus to storyline and plot development and incredibly off the wall sort of content in terms of their bosses, the boss mechanics themselves, the trial fights, the savage raiding, the alliance raids, everything like that. The actual content of Final Fantasy XIV is something that you just will not find anywhere else. And I think that's really one of the biggest things that came with Shadowbringers is, yes, it's more of the same, but when you say more of the same with Shadowbringers, you're basically saying more of, I don't know what's going to happen next. That lack of predictability is very exciting to me personally. And those are all elements that you could have talked about promoting the game, or if you'd actually played it for more than just a few hours. But the fact that the particular reviews that I've read have focused around the game not being flashy enough and they can't get on with it simply because the spell effects are not as good as they are in this other game, that seems like you're in the wrong sort of business, really. If you have a passion for playing that type of game, perhaps you can find the positive points in each of those things. The real negatives of Final Fantasy XIV are way beyond that of spell effects. They're all tied majoritively, the negative stuff is due to the fact that 1.0 coding is still present and holds back a lot of the gameplay mechanics that prevents the development of things. That's Final Fantasy XIV's biggest withdrawal. But the spell effects were never an issue. The graphical fidelity was always looking pretty good, in my opinion. It was always a very nice looking game in comparison to the stuff I was playing back when 1.0 was out. I was playing World of Warcraft, for example. It looked fantastic, but gameplay wise, it just didn't appeal to me personally. So I think there's been a lot of changes over the years that have positively changed the game for the better. But yeah, all we're going to be talking about is spell effects not being flashy enough, which is completely bogus, because if you actually have stuff set to a decent level on a default sort of setup on a computer, I mean, even on like normal graphics settings on a PlayStation 4 or a PlayStation 4 Pro, looks absolutely insane. You do any of the old Alliance raids, you do any of the Shadowbringers content, which is more relevant to this discussion, you'll be blown away by the sheer intensity of some of those effects. You know, limit breaks when they go off, they shake the screen if you have that enabled, and, you know, things explode, and it looks really, really, really cool to me personally. But I don't know. You see, I'm under the weird sort of situation where I do play lots of other MMOs and games that people send me from developers and things, so it's not like I don't have the same outlook as those people actually reviewing these games, and in particular Shadowbringers. I just think it simply comes down to the fact that they're either not doing their job properly, or that they are trying to detract away from the fact that they actually do enjoy the game, but they have to spin it for some particular reason. So I don't really understand it. Let me know what you think about this. Is the game simply not flashy enough for you? Do you think spell effects are not flashy enough? I'm really excited to see if anybody has that sort of standpoint, and try and flesh out your reasoning behind that as much as possible. But anyway, I thought I'd cover this today because it's something that somebody suggested, and I'm always open to suggestions. So thank you all kindly for watching. Those are my opinions. They represent my own opinions and no one else's, obviously. Obviously, I was not referencing anyone in particular in this video. I didn't mention any names or any direct quotes, but of course you can Google all of this yourself. Thank you kindly for watching. I'm looking forward to your comments below, and I'll see you all next time.